This is the Investor Connect Kiwi Tech 2022 podcast series. In this series, we discuss trends and topics in the startup world. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Investor Connect is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors and startups for fundraising. Please consider donating $100 to the program to help others in their investor and entrepreneur journey. You can find the donate button on the investorconnect.org website. I'm the founder and CEO of 10 Capital, and today we have a panel on the opportunities in food tech. Let's go ahead and bring up the panel. So first up, we have Sarah Bain. Sarah, can you tell us more about yourself and your firm?
Happy to. Thanks for having me. I'm Sarah Bain, Venture Principal at Techstars. For those of you that may not know, Techstars is a worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed, and we're actually the largest seed stage investor in the world. We have over 2,800 portfolio companies and a $63 billion market cap. I've been at Techstars now for just over 6 years, and I've spent my time running our retail, farm to fork, and sports tech programs, and have also managed a portfolio of 150 of our alumni companies.
Great, thank you. Next up is Carter Williams. Carter, can you tell us about yourself and your firm?
I'm Carter Williams. I'm part of the iSelect team. We're a venture firm based in St. Louis. We focus on ag tech and healthcare and the convergence of how what we eat affects metabolic health. We've invested in about 55 companies, just took Benson Hill public, and are very involved in sort of upstream ag and data analytics and such around healthcare that helps people improve how they think about their healthcare and improve their nutrition.
Great, thanks. Next up is Alexander Borschow. Alexander, can you tell us about yourself and your firm?
Good afternoon, everyone. Alex Borschow here, co-founder and managing partner of Semio Partners. We are an early and emerging growth stage venture capital fund with offices in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and New York. I co-founded the firm 7 years ago, and in the last 5 years, we've invested in 23 companies across the sustainable food, beverage, and food tech sectors. We primarily focus on Series A stage companies, but do invest in some later emerging growth stages. We're investors in companies like Imperfect Foods, Farmer's Fridge, Jackfruit Company, Robin Food, among others. And it's a pleasure to be here. I've been a direct angel investor in food tech for the last 10 years.
Great, thank you. And next we have Brian Emerson. Brian, can you tell us about yourself and your firm?
Sure, Hall. Thanks so much. I founded Starlight Capital in 1999 as a vehicle to screen entrepreneurial opportunities that I might want to invest in myself. This has grown to a network of over 30,000 individual investors in the U.S., and we've placed about $300 million in deals over the years, as noted on our website at starlightcapital.co. Starlight does not have a fund, but it does represent all its various investor interests. And with respect to food, we do a lot in early stage agriculture that supports sustainable small scale technologies for food security, whether that be through investments or charitable grants.
Great, thank you. So our first question to the panelists today is, what is the main trend in the food tech space? Sarah, can you kick us off there with what do you see as the main trend in there so far?
Sure. So I can tell you really from a farm to fork perspective, or what we're actually really interested in. I'd say that we're leaning into the technologies that have a positive impact on the labor markets, robotics, automation, efficiency technologies that make the workforce more effective are probably some of the biggest trends or areas that we're looking at specifically.
Great. And Carter, what do you see as the main trend here so far?
There's a large shift to more protein as we sort of see global markets and foreign countries increase the number of people in the middle class, putting demand on the protein chain. So we expect that the food system is going to have to realign for that. And then at the same time, people want higher quality food. They're more concerned about their health. They're understanding the connection between health and what they eat. And so that's putting more demands on transparency and an understanding both from a healthcare standpoint and from, to a degree, some ESG factors that people are sort of putting pressure back on the supply chain and challenging it to be more responsible.
Great, thanks. And Alexander, what do you see as the main trend in the food tech space today from where you are?
So one of the biggest trends we're seeing that was really accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic was the introduction of technology and digitalization, the way we discover and procure food. So COVID really accelerated grocery commerce where it was languishing in terms of adoption. And you saw over a 6 to 9 month period, the same amount of growth in adoption in e-commerce for groceries that you saw in the previous 5 years. So the way consumers are starting to discover food, be it through social media, ordering through an app, that didn't happen really for most Americans 5 years ago. And now you have a whole new generation, millennials and Gen Z. Gen Z is going to be the biggest demographic in the US for the next 5 to 10 years. They predominantly look for shopping and discovering food on social media platforms, be it Instagram or Facebook or TikTok. So we're seeing a lot of innovation in the models in which consumers are accessing food. The logistics and supply chain technology has improved there for being able to have not only cold supply chain, but frozen supply chains for direct-to-consumer brands launching without having to go to retail brick and mortar. It's really changing the dynamic. And these omni-channel brands that have e-commerce, retail, and direct-to-consumer channels are becoming more and more interesting.
Great. Thank you for that. And Brian, what's your take on what is the main trend in the food tech space today?
Well, we're really focusing on the building blocks of the food industry and trying to get into things like these sustainable small-scale technologies for food security, such as biochar to enhance soil, cold weather overwintering of bees for northern climates, better severe high weather tunnel materials, and more efficient storing, transportation, and distribution of non-GMO seeds. We think that's going to have a lot of impact for the whole world.
Great, thanks. My next question to the panel is, what will we see in plant-based proteins? Since Carter, you called that out as your main trend, let's start with you and give us more detail or color around what's going to happen there.
I think the trend to date has been about clean proteins, non-GMO, less price sensitivity, which sort of was the win behind the sales of like Beyond. I think what we're now starting to see is a broader array of CPGs thinking about what plant-based proteins are, the emergence of flexitarians, and now the CPGs understand who they are. And they're trying to figure out how to deliver 2 dinners a week in the plant-based protein type of realm. And there's a lot more price sensitivity that will come into the market. And so what that means in terms of on the input side, that we're going to shift probably from a high-end, clean protein sort of environment to an environment where people are saying we're going to 10x demand, and there's going to be less sensitivity on clean and more sensitivity on price, and that will be a global pressure. And so what that also means is people don't, if it blares non-GMO, maybe they'll get frustrated, but they may not just ask. And so if we can open up that market and get plant-based proteins to be 10%, 20% lower than animal-based proteins, I think we're going to see an exponential growth occur. And then also on the CPG side, I think we're starting to see some variations where you're going to start seeing like an ingredient or somebody that's not an expected player but has a lot of involvement in the system, where they're going to really, if you listen to their Q calls, they talk more and more about this. So I think the normal everyday CPGs are going to make this a mainstay part of their product line, which will create a lot of pressure on any new entrants in the new CPG oriented plant-based meats, which is, you can sort of see in Beyond's price, is that they really don't have an argument on the plant-based meat side. They don't have an argument that justifies a $180 per share price, and that the CPGs have channel power. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a battle there that may affect the ability to bring new startups forward on the direct-to-consumer side and the plant-based meat side.
Great. And Sarah, what do you see coming up in the plant-based protein space?
I completely agree with Carter on the pricing. We're definitely going to see a shift there. But for us in our particular program, I wouldn't say that the new brands that are on the rise are something that we're definitely interested in. However, with that being said, I think it's going to continue to grow, and the market there's going to be so much more in there. I think one of the biggest things that we really look at is the infrastructure and the mediums for the plant-based and the protein-based or the alternative space. And so really looking at companies that are making up all of this, but also looking deeply at what the infrastructure is for these particular alternative sources.
Great. And Alexander, what's your take on the plant-based space?
So where we are right now, we're kind of on like version maybe 1.5 of innovation in plant-based proteins or plant-based alternatives. And when you think about that early inning of innovation, I don't think anybody can really argue that the Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger was healthier or better for you in the first, wave of innovation. But what I'm excited about, what I see is coming about is to Carter's point about shifting towards more transparency, cleaner ingredients. The next wave of innovation is going to be more about not highly processed plant-based alternatives, but more whole plant-based alternatives. So we made an investment in the Jackfruit company 2 years ago, and their innovation really is about using whole, real plants to make alternatives that are healthier and better for humans because they're high in fiber and not full of processed ingredients. I think that's going to be an interesting next evolution of the plant-based alternative space. And the other one that is also going to be impacting the alternative protein space is not just plant-based, but also one that's adjacent is cultivated meat, which is producing meat in a lab as opposed to using animals. That cost curve, that scale is going to come down. And I think that's going to become a bigger part of the alternative meat space, if you want to call it that. But alongside, plant-based is going to continue to grow, but I think it's going to be a shift towards more full plant-based, cleaner ingredients, healthier products.
Great, thank you. Next question to the panel is, what's the outlook on vertical farming? How are we going to see that roll out? Sarah, you want to kick that off for us?
Yeah, so this might be a bit of a protagonist view or a controversial view. I truthfully have a hard time understanding who really is going to win in this space. It's incredibly fragmented. The unit economics are hard. It'll be high because you're replacing the sun, essentially. And truthfully, we haven't invested in it through Farm to Fork, but I do truly believe that it is part of the agricultural industry. But I'm just not sure if there will be one very large venture-backed farm. I believe in vertical farming. I believe in indoor farming. I just can't fully wrap my head around if there will be one that totally wins the space.
Great. And Carter, what's your take on vertical farming? Where do you think it's going to go?
There'll be some version of it. I think that the innovation needs to come in areas like project finance. There's still many of these. But it's very much, some businesses are early bird catches the worm and owns the market. Others are the second mouse gets the cheese. And so I think that there are the people who come next can build cheaper, better infrastructure off the backs of the people that came before them. That said, there are some macro forces around. If someone could figure out how to do good asset-based lending or project finance in the space, I think it would lower the cost of capital operation. It wouldn't solve the unit cost problem, but would fix some of their capital structure issues that they're having. And then I think that the other big elephant in the room is food security, which certainly we sort of have been thinking about with Ukraine. But if you, on a global basis, if you're in the Middle East and you get your fresh produce from the Sudan and you have China coming in, basically consuming everything out of the Sudan, and you're going to get squeezed out. There's a lot of geopolitical pressure moving things around. And so I think that the indoor farming from a food security standpoint might be the next major generation of innovation to come. And then it may over time, and, within the US, I think that it's not as important an opportunity. But in other countries that have tighter borders and are competing with China for fresh food supply, you're going to see a lot. We're seeing movement. You can see it in some of the financings recently and where the bigger operators are focused.
Great, thanks. And Alexander, what's your take on vertical farming? How do you see it rolling out?
So we've looked at the indoor, the CEA-controlled environment agriculture vertical farming space extensively over the last 5 years and visited many different startups in the space. There's been quite a bit of hype and frothiness around some of the big announcements like Plenty raising $200 million from SoftBank, Vision Fund, Bright Farms was acquired last year, Gotham Greens just raising $100 million Series E. Honestly, we've avoided investing. We've passed investing on any of these companies in the space. Ironox did a big raise last year, focusing on automation. I think that Every time we've looked at the economics, the unit economics and the business model, it just never really clicked and made sense to us. But now you're starting to see companies that have gone through somewhere between 5 and 10 years of R&D and continuous improvement and done it with quite a bit of capital, but trying to get to models that do make sense. So, when you have a greenhouse that's co-located basically with a distribution center for a grocery retailer in a region, you really can cut down on transportation costs and actually improve freshness and quality of products. But the product set is limited, right? You're not going to be feeding the world with lettuce, right? There is a huge market for lettuce and leafy greens in the US, at least. And it's like a $4 billion market. And so it's not insignificant, but going from there to producing other things like tomatoes or vegetables, it's not going to solve all the problems, but it's definitely going to be a model that will be effective for certain products. And one thing that we see is consumers are willing to pay more for local products. So one of the things that vertical farming does offer is that co-location closer to urban areas, closer to the consumer. It allows the marketing of local products, and it gives a retailer a more secure supply chain, less transportation logistics costs, which, as we've all seen, have become a bigger issue, especially with 96% of the lettuce in the U.S. produced basically in California and partly in Arizona. So when you have huge transportation cost logistics issues with transportation across the U.S., when you can have a greenhouse located, within an hour's drive of New York City and Boston and Philadelphia, that's a big shift in the availability of fresher, healthier produce. So it's going to have its place. I don't think it's going to be publicly traded companies like AppHarvest. They haven't really proven that they can actually produce any real commercial scales, but I think it's going to be over the next 5 to 7 years, you're going to see the several leaders and winners in the space. I don't think it's going to be just one.
Great. And Brian, what's your take on vertical farming? Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, I want to echo some of Alexander's great points. We have invested in a very small scale vertical farm. It works on kind of the individual level, but when you look at the inputs, light, water, shelter with heat, nutrients distribution, we haven't found anything that looks like it'll scale and be profitable yet. I know there are some models out there that are coming online, and we think it will be important going forward to feed everyone, but we haven't found anything yet that we put money in on a larger scale. So we're looking.
Great. So our next question is what role will the Zero Food Waste initiative take? And Carter, can you kick us off there and tell us more about where you think that fits in the startup landscape right now?
Well, so I started my career with lean manufacturing back in 1989, 1990 in the aircraft industry. And the concept that I was taught around zero waste is less about how do you use waste and how do you eliminate it. And I think that at that point, you start really getting to the fundamental engineering of the supply chain and cleaning it up. So we do pay attention to it. We have been looking at use of waste versus reduction of waste. I would say that we've seen a lot of use of waste type products, but we're really only interested in terms of our investment strategy in terms of fundamentally eliminating the creation of waste. When we did that in manufacturing, we typically saw orders of magnitude change in production efficiency. When we looked at recovery of waste, we typically saw incremental gains. So we're focused about that in the genetics and upstream in the supply chain and some of the ordering systems, preservation and areas like that to look at better mechanisms.
Great, thanks. And Alexander, where do you see zero food waste playing in the current market?
Yeah, I actually am really excited about the movement to eliminate and reduce food waste. Now, food waste happens at several different steps in the value chain, right? There's food waste at the production farm level, there's food waste at the distribution level, and then there's food waste at the retail and the home level. So if we can, you can separate each of those and create opportunities for reducing waste in that space. But from an environmental impact perspective, consumers are very interested in reducing food waste. Nobody likes wasting products. I was an angel investor in Imperfect Foods, and then my fund, Semillero Partners, ended up investing as well. They're a great example of a company that their mission was to set out to reduce food waste. And just to demonstrate how much consumers were aligned with their mission, they grew dramatically over the first 4 years because consumers who liked the idea that they were taking all this fruits, vegetables, food that was otherwise going to be thrown out or wasted at the farm level, right? Because it wasn't optically perfect, it didn't have the perfect shape or it had a little scratch on it, but it was perfectly nutritious and healthy, and being able to buy it at a 30 to 50% discount to retail. So consumers are very interested in initiatives to reduce food waste and are willing to pay for products that are quote unquote, otherwise would be wasted. To Carter's point, there's a lot of opportunities in the food service industry to reduce waste, and both retail and food service. I mean, one of the reasons that the development of hot lunch counters or bars within grocery stores became so popular is because it was a great way for them to reduce their food waste. Typically, grocers, anything that's fresh or perishable, you have a 5-7% waste. If you can now turn that into, okay, well, it's going to be expiring in 4 or 5 days, you can take that, turn that into an entree or salad and have that in your salad bar within the store. It's a great initiative to reduce food waste as well. So the big question with food waste is how do you measure, right? How do we get an idea, a handle around how much is being wasted and what part, and creating easy initiatives and incentives to reduce that waste. So we looked at companies like Spoiler Alert. It's a great company that helps reduce food waste at a more industry, large-scale commercial level. And there's lots of initiatives that are more the Uber model, where you have a sharing economy where individual stores, coffee shops have excess product. They're like, hey, this is going to go bad tomorrow. I'm willing to sell it at 50% discount to anybody right now just to clear the inventory. How do I create access to consumers like through an application? There's many apps that popped up. So food waste reduction initiatives are definitely very interesting and evolving. There's a lot of capital that's being thrown behind that, both in Europe and the US. And I'm excited to see what the impact of those is over the next decade.
Great. And Brian, what's your take on Zero Food Waste Initiative? Where do you think it's going to play out?
Well, give the example of the vertical farm we talked about earlier. We implemented a zero food waste in that to make sure that as much food was available as possible to humans, then animals, and then compost. And I think that any business plan going forward in food is going to need to take that into account to help increase its sustainability and profitability. So something every entrepreneur should look at in the field.
So our next question is, what is the impact of Foodtech on plastic packaging? Where do we see plastic packaging going? Sarah, what's your take there?
Yeah, so I think the big challenge in the space is plastic packaging, and it has a really dramatic effect on shelf stability, food safety, and it's hard to actually remove that plastic from those things, from the things that they're packaging, because there are real challenges like water barrier hurdles, and protecting the food can be much more difficult with that. I think the early adopters are specifically some of the ones that are really shaking it up. One company that we invested in it's called Dispatch Goods. And so they're removing the single-use packaging by using reusable containers. They're creating a fourth bin. Some of the biggest areas that they've found success in is freezer packs. And so actually picking up freezer packs and reusing those through restaurants, through other vendors and customers that they have. I also think we've seen a lot of companies that are focused on manufacturing and actually wrapping the pallets where the water barrier doesn't need to be as great or have the same level of regulatory approvals that the packaging may for food and other food safety.
Okay. And Alexander, what do you think is going to happen to the plastic packaging industry as Foodtech takes off?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I want to happen, and then I'll tell you what I think might happen. So my vision for the future is that plastic packaging will no longer exist, and all packaging will be completely biodegradable. Because to be honest, changing human behavior to try to get recycling up to the levels that we need to make it effective is unrealistic. So I think that the only solution and the types of solutions we're looking to invest in are those which create completely biodegradable packaging. And there's some really interesting startups in the space, like, for example, Lollyware. Lollyware has been working for the last 5-6 years in R&D to take seaweed, right, and basically replace the plastic, pellets that are used for extruding and plastic packaging materials today, and replace them with something that's completely seaweed-based and biodegradable. That's game-changing, right? So the point is, our global infrastructure for packaging, you're talking about, hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in production facilities and supply chains, that's just not going to disappear. There's too much industrial inertia to have that disappear. A solution that basically replaces the input, the feed material in that system with something that works equivalently. They don't have to change their machines, but is based on something that is A, plant-based, nature-based, and B, biodegradable. That's what's really interesting. So I think you're going to see a lot of innovation around completely biodegradable packaging, compostable as well, but compostable requires usually like a commercial compost facility. It's not really like you just throw it in your garbage and it'll compost. And I saw someone asking about, you mentioned about seaweed or mushroom-based packaging. Mycotechnology is a great example as well. We invested in a seaweed company in Maine called Atlantic Sea Farms. But the circular economy aspect of this is also really important because 100 years ago, everything was a circular economy. We didn't throw out anything close to what we throw out today, right? It was designed to be reused. Now, if we return to that concept, we invested in a landfill gas renewable energy project because humans are not going to stop throwing out, creating waste, right? So the packaging is going to go to landfills. It's going to produce methane and biogas. There has to be capturing of that and not letting it get into the atmosphere so that we can actually start reducing and eventually get to net zero carbon. Packaging is going to be a big part of that. So it has to be solutions that are completely biodegradable and break down in a matter of months, not decades or hundreds of years.
Great, thanks. And Brian, what's your take on that question?
Well, I think we all know what plastics have done to the environment, and we've looked at solutions that are dealing with recycled cardboard, paper for packaging, starch, bamboo, and others. And those could be converted into power, heat, compost, and things. So we've seen several promising companies that are looking at these, and but we haven't invested in it yet. So I think that's going to be very important for sustainability going forward, as the other panelists have mentioned.
Great. And my last question is where do investors find good opportunities for food tech startups? Are these coming out of the university? Are they spin-outs out of corporate R&D? Or are they two guys in a garage that just have a great idea? Where do you think the source is going to come from? Sarah, what's your take?
Well, shameless plug here. I'm going to say for a lot of later stage investors, we at Techstars have an incredible portfolio. And we're also going to have another great group of 12 companies coming through this program. But we're specifically finding some of those companies is, from the universities, like you said. And there are great organizations such as Foodtech, where we see a lot of them, other accelerators, other incubators, and having a wonderful referral network of mentors and investors internally at Techstars. We see a lot of those companies and get access to a lot of them.
Great, thanks. And Carter, where do you think the source is going to come from?
Well, the bulk of our investments are in companies led by people that are 35 to 45 years old. And that's when you look at venture investing, the bulk of successful ventures falls on that camp. But it also depends on what part of the sector you're in. In our particular case, we're a bit more upstream. And so a lot of institutional knowledge is beneficial in terms of how those systems operate. Whereas I think on some of the consumer side, there are aspects that are more flexible and will shift. I think that from an investor standpoint, the most important thing is our network. We have not invested much in anything coming out of academia except on the healthcare side. And young, off the street startups, we haven't done very much or much from the incubators. But that's also because of the nature of the kinds of companies we're investing in. So I think it depends on what kind of who you are and what you are in sort of the ecosystem. Probably you gotta wander through different groups of investors that understand how to probably work with you.
Great. And Alexander, what's your take? Where do you think the food tech startups will be coming from?
So we've seen an incredible amount of innovation in food tech coming from Israel. We've been active looking at several accelerated programs there for a number of years and really amazed both from ag tech and food tech, robotics, biotech for food. So we see that as an incredible hub of innovation there. Same way, I went to MIT, and MIT has really picked up its entrepreneurial ecosystem focused on food tech. So we see a lot of both other universities spurring investment in innovation into startups and innovation in those spaces. So I think those academic institutions that have technology and have an interest in innovating in food and see that as a solution for some of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You're going to see innovation coming from there. And then the mother of all innovation really is need, right? So when you see countries like China, right, that is looking at ways to feed their population sustainably, I think in the most recent 5-year plan, they mentioned that they were going to be allocating a significant amount of capital to specifically cultivated meat and food tech. So those are the signals that when, top-down mandates for investment in technology, innovation, and food, those are where you're going to see also innovation being driven.
Great. And Brian, what's your take? Where do you think the sources of good startups in food tech are going to come from?
Well, we found some interesting candidates from the U.S. Department of Agricultural grant recipients. Also, people who have taken state funding. They're solving local problems. And to the extent that those can be scaled up, we're having some really good discussions there.
Well, I want to thank everybody. That's at the end of our time here for the panel. I want to thank our panelists for their time, their wisdom, and their experience that they shared with us today. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.